This happened when I was 12 years old, an age old enough to be aware of my surroundings and have a pretty good sense of danger, but also still around that age that attracts a certain selection of creeps. We live in a decently busy neighborhood. However, we're on a dead-end block near a forest preserve, and across the street from us is a sump, and if you were to go through the forest preserve, you would find yourself in a small community park. There was this one Saturday night that a mini carnival was being held in the park, and since I wasn't doing anything with friends, my mom suggested that I go check out the carnival. She isn't the kind of mom who tells her kids not to go out past dark. She always let me do my own thing. So I did end up going. I crossed through the forest with a flashlight and eventually passed the fence that led to the park and saw lit up carnival rides everywhere. A Ferris wheel, a mini roller coaster, some of those big spinning rides, and of course concession stands and carnival game booths. It was late enough where it wasn't very crowded. There was also a big circus tent with the red and white stripes where I saw some people entering. I poked my head inside, where I saw 4 rows of people in the audience, and on this mini stage were 3 clowns performing tricks. One was on a tricycle, one was juggling, and the other was just dancing around. Then the dancing one noticed me poking my head inside the tent, and he skipped over closer to me and started waving his index finger, signaling for me to come closer, or to come onto the stage. I didn't really know. All I knew is I didn't want to do either, and so I walked away. I ran into a friend at one of the carnival games, and I hung out with him for about half an hour. Pretty soon the carnival was closing down, and everybody was starting to leave. I said goodbye to my friends and made my way towards the woods again. I was near the fence when I heard, "Psst." It came from behind me. It was one of the clowns. The clown that was waving me over earlier. He asked me if I wanted to check out the backstage area of the circus tent and some of the cool things the guests cannot see. I said no very quickly and walked into the forest, looking back every few seconds to make sure I wasn't being followed. And I wasn't. The clown just stood there watching me, with the painted-on smile on his face making the situation even more disturbing. When I was out of view, I began to run for a bit before I was confident he wouldn't be able to find me. I was not going to tell my mom what happened because I loved being allowed out whenever I wanted, and I feared that this might ruin that. It's a half-mile walk through the woods. I was probably 3/4 of the way there when I heard it again. Psst. This time, I immediately felt sick when I heard it. I turned and saw the same clown walking out from the darkness of the woods into the light of my flashlight. When he was close enough, I threw the flashlight at him and ran for it in the direction of my house. I heard him close behind me until the road was visible. Then I heard him turn around. When I got home, I was breathing like I had just run a marathon, and my mom was of course concerned. I still didn't want to tell her what happened, so I lied and said I jogged the whole way back. After that, it never came up again. Up until the age of 14, I always had a fear of clowns, ever since I was first greeted with one at the age of 5 at a county fair. On a cold Tuesday night in November during break, my parents were on vacation and my sister and brother were out for the night. My friend, who I'll refer to as B, wanted to come over so that we could walk to the fair a couple blocks away. So he did. We walked to the fair, which happened to be in a big empty parking lot. We walked around for a little while and played some of the carnival games. Then we ran into a clown. He didn't speak, he just smiled, bopped around, and made silly hand motions. He resembled more of a mime than a clown. And he seemed to inch his way closer to us every few seconds. Me and B laughed, B patted him on the shoulder, and we walked away. "That was weird," I told B. "That was more creepy than weird," said B. We were walking back to my house now on the sidewalks of the quiet Tuesday night neighborhood roads. And that's when we heard something from behind us. It was a pair of footsteps. We turned, but didn't see anyone. This continued for another few minutes. B said he was freaked out and was gonna go home, but I convinced him to stay with me and hang out at my place, honestly because I was scared now. We were sure we were being followed. We made it to the front of my house. I dug through my pocket, took out my keychain, and started looking for the right key out of the 3 in the dark. That's when B nudged me to turn around. There was a clown hiding in the next door neighbor's bushes, and he was staring at us. When he noticed that we had spotted him, he emerged from the bushes and started walking over to us. I began to panic, trying each of the 3 keys until the door finally opened. We entered and slammed the door behind us. I called my parents right away, who told us to arm ourselves and hide upstairs. We went up to my little brother's room and looked out the window. There was the clown standing in our driveway, looking up at the window we were standing at, as if he were waiting for us. I shut the blinds and we both ducked down. Breathing heavily and panicking, within 10 minutes, he was gone. I guess he gave up, or at least we think he was gone. For all we knew, he could have been hiding somewhere on the property all night. I'm just happy we made it home in time. If you've seen the news lately, there have been many reports of clowns luring children into the forest. I was one of the first to experience this, and it was utterly terrifying. I want to remain anonymous at the moment, just in case the clown finds out who I am. Anyways, here's what happened. I am 14 years old and live in a small town in South Carolina. The town has a population of around 130 people. Summer was just about over, and I had a summer job working at the local lumber yard. It was a great place to work. I helped customers load lumber into their vehicles, a pretty mindless job. Plus, I was able to stay physically fit because of it. The best part is that my house is exactly 1 mile away. Walking to and from work is a daily occurrence. I spent a long day hauling and moving lumber, and my workday was pretty much complete. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I started to walk home. The moon was just starting to light up the road, and the sun had completely set below the hills. There are no other houses between the lumberyard and my house. Our town is very rural. The road home has hills that peak high enough that you're unable to see what's on the other side until you crest it. The road is skinny with no shoulder, but it was freshly paved. The trees stack one by one behind each other in a row, and vegetation is thick with a few game trails coming out to the road. Crickets and frogs sound like an orchestra. The walk home usually takes about 30 minutes. I've done it so many times that I entertain myself with music. I put in my earbuds, throw on some tunes, and away I went. I was about halfway home when I heard what sounded like a high-pitched cackling laugh. What the hell was that? I said to myself out loud. I took out my earbuds and stopped. I thought maybe it was part of the music, but something about it didn't fit into the song. I stood there motionless, looking to hear the same sound again. However, the frogs croaking were so loud that not even a scream could be heard. I thought nothing of it and walked home. The next day, I started my shift at 2 p.m. I started my walk to work around 1:30. Nothing was out of the ordinary. It was a beautiful day. I usually look down at my feet and kick any rocks that I see. Having them skip across the fresh pavement was oddly satisfying. I kicked a rock and it skipped across the pavement and landed next to something strange laying in the dirt on the side of the road. It looked to be a bright red ball. I picked it up, I gave it a little pressure, and it squeaked. Immediately, I knew what it was. This is a clown nose, I said to myself. What the hell is this doing out here? I kept it and carried it to work to show the other staff members. I even put it on and gave it some honks. It got a few laughs. The day went on as usual, and around 9:30 p.m. I clocked out and began my long walk home. I forgot my earbuds at home, so I was unable to listen to my usual music. While on my way home, I was able to make out a faint image of a figure about 150 yards away of what looked like a deer standing in the middle of the road. It was hard to make out as the fog hovered over the ground and the moonlight backlit the animal. As I got within 100 yards, it must have gotten spooked. I could see a rough outline scamper back into the forest. Little did I know this was not a deer, but something more sadistic. I passed the spot in which the deer had taken off back into the woods. As I walked by, I heard footsteps about 20 yards behind me. I thought this was strange, as I have never seen a deer come back onto the road once it was scared off. Before I could look back, I heard, "Hey there." I turned my head to see a clown standing in the middle of the road with his hands behind his back. He wore baggy pants and a baggy shirt that was obviously meant to be a clown costume, but it was very dirty. So dirty that the colors faded into stains. His makeup ran down his face and his eyes were black. He tilted his head to the side and said, "You have something of mine. I need it back." He gave a small little laugh after he spoke. I don't have anything of yours," I said as I started to walk backwards. My house was still a quarter mile away. This is when the situation went from odd to terrifying. He said, "Well then, if you don't have my nose, I'm gonna need yours." He pulled something out from behind his back, and I'm not gonna lie, it looked like a machete. I turn around, and with all my might, I take off running down the middle of the road. I could hear his bare feet running. I didn't look back as it could slow me down. The blades of what I assumed were two machetes dragged on the asphalt. I was in great shape, but I could still hear his footsteps getting louder, signaling he was getting closer to me. He would even let out a little giggle that would feed my adrenaline even more. My lungs started to burn. I began to crest the hill. At this moment, I could hear him almost right behind me, just about touching me. And then out of nowhere, a truck crests the hill with its headlights shining on me. I waved my arms in sheer panic. He stopped. I quickly looked behind me to see nothing. No clown. I told the man in the truck what happened, and he called the police. I will never make that walk again. I have no idea how the clown got to that location and why he waited for me. I have never seen any vehicles parked there, nor are there any other houses besides mine for miles. This was my worst nightmare come true. Now I have found out that this is happening to more people. Clowns hiding in the woods and stalking people. Is this a cult? A group of scary clowns with a goal to terrify people? I have no idea, but I do know that I'll never be able to walk in the dark or see clowns the same way again. It was April of 2015. Me, my girlfriends, and my little brother, who was 9 years old, had gone to a small nearby movie theater on a Wednesday night to see the horror movie It Follows. We usually went late on weekends to get the whole theater to ourselves. Plus, I had off on Thursdays that semester. When we entered the theater, at first it seemed like we were the only ones inside, but then my little brother pointed somebody out. It was a man in a dark gray hoodie sitting in the top left corner seat in the theater. It was a little sketchy, but nobody would really give it a second thought. We picked upper middle row seats with a railing in front so we could put our feet up, and we each sat with an empty seat between us for more room. I know, that sounds weird to do with my girlfriend with me, but having my brother there made it a different story. I was sitting the closest to the edge, and therefore the closest to the one other guy in the room besides us. Within 5 minutes, the previews were over and the movie was starting. The lights in the theater dimmed to darkness, and the only light now was the light projecting from the screen. My little brother took out his bag of candies he snuck in and started to eat them obnoxiously loud. About 5 minutes into the movie, over my brother's loud candy wrapper noises, which we told him to stop for the record, I thought I heard a pretty loud sound come from above and behind us. I waited a few seconds to sneak a glance behind us, and saw that the guy that was sitting in the top corner had moved down a row, which was odd. But again, I didn't give it more than a second thought. Another 5 minutes later, when the movie was already starting to get interesting, I heard something from behind us again. I turned when I thought it wouldn't be too obvious, and again, the guy was a whole row closer to us. I leaned to my girlfriend and said while chuckling, "Don't look, but that guy keeps moving closer to the screen." She shrugged her shoulders and didn't even show interest in checking. I told myself if he did it again, then I would have a problem, and managed to get back into the movie. I'd say another 5 minutes later, without even hearing anything this time, I just turned around out of curiosity and saw the man a whole row closer, but this time he wasn't at the last seat of the row anymore. He was moved further down the row, closer to us. Now he was only 3 rows behind us. I nudged my girlfriend and she turned around. Then she looked at me and gave me a confused, concerned kind of look. She asked me if we should move, and I said definitely not. At this point, I wasn't able to pay attention to the movie anymore. Even though I was facing the screen, I felt like the man's gaze was hitting me in the back of the head. I told myself if he moves closer, I would turn around and firmly ask him what he was doing. But then I also thought, what if I'm looking too much into this? What if he's just a normal guy who happens to keep switching seats for a better view? Once more, I turned around, and the man was only 2 rows away from us now, closer to the center of the row, or rather directly behind us, and his head was just completely down looking at his lap. I didn't even bother to check what he was looking at. He could have been looking at nothing. I literally opened my mouth ready to say something, but I was just too much of a coward. I was only 16 last year and pretty skinny. My little brother got up during a slow part of the movie to go to the bathroom. About a minute later, I turned to see if the man had gotten closer again, this time actually ready to say something. But I was shocked to see nobody behind us. It was completely empty. I told my girlfriend, and she said good. But then I stood up in pure fear, thinking of my little brother. Telling my girlfriend to wait there and running out of the room and into the empty theater halls, I saw the man in the gray hoodie entering the men's bathroom down the hall. Fearing for my little brother's safety, I ran down the hall toward the bathroom, opened the door, and saw the man literally on his knees peeking under the 2 stall doors. Then he looked at me, and at the same time I heard my little brother call me from down the hall. I saw him waving me over in confusion. I ran to him, got my girlfriend out of the movie room, and we went to the front desk. The teen working the front ticket stand called the police, showed us and the cops the video footage of the man walking down the hall, and then we filed a police report. I'm just so grateful that my brother went to a different bathroom down the opposite direction of the hall, because if he had been in there, even with my showing up to save him, I have no idea what would have happened. It's been over a year now, and the man was never identified. Back in 2008, Cloverfield was one of the biggest movies of the year, and I desperately wanted to see it. Most of my friends had already gone to see it, which upset me given that I didn't want to be seen going to the movie theater alone. However, I didn't have work or school on Thursdays, so on Wednesday night, I figured I could get away with going alone to one of the small theaters nearby with a screening of the film at 9:30, since I knew it would be quiet. Well, I showed up, bought a ticket, and immediately realized the entire building was dead. I entered the theater, and much to my surprise, there was not a single person in there. There were 2 large sections of seats in the theater. I sat in the bottom row of the upper section, which was seated just behind a tiny wall. During the quiet parts of the movie, which were very few, I kept thinking that I was hearing something coming from behind me. It was almost like I was hearing a voice. Is someone there? Nothing. I felt like the sounds were just getting louder and closer, but I kept turning around and didn't see anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind. Eventually, the sounds became so loud that it was evident it was a crazed whispering. I was about to nope the fuck out of there, but when I got up and took one last look behind me, a figure popped up quickly from behind the seats just 2 rows up from me, arms flat to their sides and just facing me like a stiff statue. I ran like there was no tomorrow back to the lobby, where I saw nobody, not a single employee. I kept running to the car, took a few seconds to catch my breath once inside, and drove back home. I tried calling the theater that same night. I never got anyone to answer. I didn't bother the next day, and I just tried to let it go. It still freaks me out beyond imagination to this day. One of my first jobs was working at a movie theater in Huntington on Long Island. It was an okay gig for a 16-year-old. Dealing with the general public in Mass, you'll always run into creeps. However, there was one creep and one really weird situation that I still have nightmares about. It was a Monday, like 11 o'clock at night, and the last 2 playing movies were finishing up, which was earlier than usual. On weeknights, I would usually be out of there by midnight during the summer. Anyway, I was the only one working besides Kathy, the lady behind the popcorn counter who was closing up. I was sitting on the carpeted steps next to my ticket podium on my phone when Kathy yelled over to me to sweep the floors. She told me she was heading out and would be back within the hour to close up. I hurried up with the sweeping and sat back down to get back to playing a Tetris-like game on my flip phone. I was left alone a lot like this, and this was the one time during my shifts that I feared something such as a late-night robbery might easily take place. Suddenly, I heard the front door to the theater pull open with force. I stared down at the doorway to the lobby, which blocked the actual entrance section, waiting for someone to walk through, and hoping it would be Kathy. After all, she would have locked the doors anyway at this hour. I called out Kathy's name, and suddenly, an upper middle-aged man with a big brown faded jacket came wandering in, immediately locking his eyes onto mine. I told him we were closing up and he had to leave. He looked at me with a sort of intimidating Vincent Pastore kind of look on his face. He mumbled his words in his response, but I could make out his phrase to be, "Is Kathy here?" I shook my head no, and he mumbled, "I'm just gonna go sit down over there for a while." I was very against confrontations with other people, so my heart was racing, and I lacked the confidence to order him to leave. I sat back down on the step and pretended to be absorbed in my phone, when really I was texting Kathy telling her there was someone weird here for her. But with the old flip phones, texts took forever to send, and even longer for people to check. By the time the text was sent, I noticed the man, now across the room sitting on a bench, was literally watching me. I wanted to show him that I was annoyed by this, so I simply got up, walked up the 3 carpeted stairs, and sat down on the bench in front of a wall that would block my view from him. Stupid old me didn't figure this would allow him to do whatever he wanted not being within my vision. Within minutes, I realized this was dumb and went back to sitting on the step, only now the man was gone. Kathy returned around the same time that the last of the moviegoers were leaving. I told her about the guy, and she said she left the door unlocked by mistake. I spent about 10 minutes sweeping up in some of the auditorium rooms before my shift was officially over. Kathy wanted me to do one more favor before leaving: bring the mop, bucket, and broom down into the storage den. I did as she asked, opened the door in the lobby which leads to the storage area, walked down the half-flight of concrete stairs with the mop, broom, and bucket, and stopped. Behind one of the boilers, I could see as clear as day an arm tucked away in the corner. It was the man, and he was very clearly trying to hide. I pretended like I didn't notice and walked back up the stairs. I locked the door behind me and ran to Kathy. She checked the camera footage first, and this is where things got disturbing. Within the period of time that I was hiding from the man, the surveillance cameras caught him getting up and leaving the theater. Kathy seemed surprised and declared, "That's my ex-husband." I felt like my heart was starting to drop as she said this, and I was starting to put things together. I assured her there was in fact somebody down there. She took out her cell phone and dialed not for 911, but rather for her ex-husband as she left the building. I followed her, afraid to stay in the theater alone. Kathy suddenly started to panic, as it seemed her ex-husband hung up the phone on her. She then called the cops, and what she explained to them shocked and disturbed me. When she hung up the phone, she was in a panic, and she tugged me away from the building. It turned out her ex-husband arrived to the theater to get her out of there, because he had apparently run into some trouble with a guy he knew who threatened to kill Kathy for whatever messed up reason. The cop cars pulled up into the parking lot with their sirens blaring. Minutes later, they came out with some old Italian mobster-looking guy in cuffs. Kathy never showed up for work after that, and I was never able to get the full backstory out from anyone. I was the coolest guy at the theater for a while since I witnessed all of this. I just really wish I got the full story though, because it really interested me. I never saw Kathy, her ex-husband, or that random guy who potentially almost killed me had I approached him ever again. A long time ago, I very briefly lived with my good friend Ben on a quiet street in Northville, Michigan, perhaps notable for being close to Detroit. It wasn't the nicest house, or block, or area for that matter, but the price was unbeatable for 2 broke young men like ourselves. Ben and I went way back to when we were like 9 years old, and at the time of this story, we worked the same job, and rooming together with him seemed like a great idea. On our first day there, we quickly figured out that the creepy-looking house across the street with the overgrown grass and bushes was abandoned, as were a lot of the houses around the area. In fact, something we somehow hadn't noticed before, there was even graffiti next to one of the front windows and on the fence. Our neighbors on one side seemed like creeps, and we didn't even want to approach them. The neighbor on the other side was an older dude, a very interesting, hippie-ish kind of guy. His name was Marv. He had long gray hair with a matching long gray beard. He seemed friendly at first, I guess, but also very weird and hard to talk to. We spoke with him on our second day there after work. He told us the place had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. That night, with the sun almost set, while we were sitting on the front stoop smoking, I looked to the house across the street and felt a little tingle in my stomach out of shock. I stood up, threw my cigarette onto the floor and crushed it. Ben looked at me confused, and I pointed to the window across the street. I was pointing at a face, which I saw staring at me through the lone upstairs window of the house. "Do you see that? There's someone at that window." Ben looked at the window immediately, but I saw the person move their head away before he could see it. It's weird. I explained to Ben that I didn't even know if it was a male or female, old or young. The glass was just too foggy. All I knew was that I saw the eyes, and they were staring at us. Ben told me I was legitimately creeping him out. He believed me. We ran over to Marv's house to tell him, but strangely he didn't answer his door, even though we saw him watching TV in his tiny, messy living room through the window. The fact that the guy wouldn't answer creeped us out even more. Dude, what the fuck is going on with this place? Ben laughed, but the situation couldn't stay comical for long. Ben owned a katana. He brought it to mention and suggested we go across the street with it, break into the house from the backyard, and see what was going on. We were always adventurous, daring troublemakers as kids, so this was our natural response to the situation. When it got dark, we went across the street to the backyard, broke off the board holding the back door shut, and entered the house. We both had heavy-duty flashlights with us to light up basically any room we were in. The house was dusty, decrepit, but surprisingly seemed to remain untouched from the inside. No graffiti or signs of vandalism anywhere. Still, the place was disturbingly creepy, and we immediately joked that we should get the fuck out of there, but we pressed on. The first floor was pathetically small like our own, a kitchen, a tiny living room, and a dining room. There was no basement and one closet. The first floor was clear. We both agreed to check the upstairs. We tiptoed over to the stairs, and Ben, out of nowhere, screamed, "Is anybody up there?" "Dude, why the fuck would you do that?" I said quietly. Then we both froze in fear when we heard rapid stomping suddenly appear from above us. It was someone heavy, and it sounded like they were running over to the stairway. I literally felt like my heart stopped. Ben, the one with the katana, was the first to flee, grabbing my arm and tugging me with him. We went out the way we entered and ran back to the house, where we saw Marv just standing by his window, watching us. We didn't know what to do. He just intently stared at us as we froze to catch our breath in front of the house. We went inside, decided not to call the police, and moved out literally the next day. We explained to the landlord that the location was just too inconvenient for us, and we needed to leave ASAP. We drove away from that house and never looked back. Alright, so there are a couple of abandoned dorms on my college campus. They were shut down like 15 years ago because of... Actually, I don't really know why. Anyway, they're abandoned. It's rumored that they'll be renovated at some point, but that'll probably never happen. Naturally, it's also rumored that they're haunted. The school has the windows boarded up to prevent students from going in there. Because I fancy myself an urban explorer who isn't afraid of getting into any trouble, I decided about a week ago that I was going to break in and take a look around. Cut to last night. I didn't really have a plan per se, other than wear black and avoid getting caught. Security on campus has been tightened recently, but I didn't have any issues getting in unseen. I'll spare you the details, but basically, you'd be surprised what you could do with a crowbar and some vandalism. I ended up crawling in through a first floor window. I found myself in an empty dorm room, illuminated only by my phone's flashlight. Now, one of the rumors is that the basement is haunted, so that's where I decided to go first. At the time, I thought I was some ballsy explorer, but I can't even express how thoroughly scared shitless I was. This building was dark, old, and smelled weird, and I thought that at any moment, something would come around the corner and tear me apart. It didn't help that my phone battery was being sucked dry by the flashlight app, so I was forced to use it very conservatively. Foresight is not my forte. Anyway, the basement. There wasn't any alleged faceless man ghost, or at least not that I saw, but this is where shit starts to get weird. Let me just set the scene. I very carefully descend the stairs. I open the door at the bottom and step into, well, a room. A completely normal room, although a little colder and with a stickier floor than I would have preferred, but otherwise completely normal. I swept my flashlight across the opposite wall, and there was another door. Probably just a laundry room, I thought. I'll go in there and take a look around, and then get out of here before I piss myself. And then I could brag to my friends that I explored the basement of one of the abandoned dorms. But it wasn't the laundry room. I opened the door to a sea of red on the floor. There was a drain in the middle of the room, but it seemed to be clogged with various organic materials. Shiny, red organic materials. I caught a glimpse of a black pentagon-like thing on the ceiling, and then I fucking ran. Up the stairs, down the hall, and out of the window I busted earlier. I didn't stop running until I got back to my dorm. I laid in bed, wide awake, absolutely terrified. I managed to fall asleep sometime after my roommate left for class. I got up around 11 o'clock. I found a piece of paper that had been slipped under the door. Did you like what you saw? It was written in bright red ink. It's gotta be someone just fucking with me, but damn, they're good at it, because this legitimately creeped me out. I'm 16 years old and currently live next to a vacant house. Barely even a vacant house, more like abandoned. I never knew why the town never made an effort to fix it up and sell it. That never really bothered me though. Not until after a recent disturbing event. My bedroom faces the neighboring house in question, and sometimes on hot nights when I had the window open, I would feel like I could hear voices or moaning type noises coming from the neighboring house. Sometimes I even wondered if those sounds were teens sneaking into the house and having sex. But one night, that changed. It was a Thursday night in July. I was on my bed playing video games home alone when I muted the TV, thinking I heard something from outside. I went to my window and literally gasped when I heard a brief scream coming from inside the abandoned house. It wasn't drawn out at all, it only lasted about maybe a second, and I could just barely hear it. My adrenaline was rushing now. I wanted to get closer immediately. I shut off the lights and TV, took my airsoft gun as a mock weapon, and hopped the backyard fence over to the abandoned house's backyard. I knew the back door was left unlocked since I had been in there before with friends. I simply opened the back sliding door quietly and crept inside just a bit to listen for any more sounds. There was a weird, steady, creaking type noise. It was very low, but it was evident. It was also as dark as it could get in there. I flicked on the light attachment on my airsoft gun and aimed it in front of me, actually feeling pretty cool for a moment. I now stepped fully into the house, and the sound grew louder. I scanned the living room, completely empty, as were the other rooms on this floor. I crept over to the basement door, which was open. The sound was coming from down there. I felt my heart begin to race, and my gut instinct was telling me to turn around and leave now. But I guess my teen boy adrenaline and curiosity got the better of me. I took one step at a time down the stairway as the creaking sound got louder, and when the opening to the basement finally became visible, I aimed the gun light around the room. I froze when the light landed on something that was moving. It was a rocking chair. I got a serious pain in my stomach when I saw the back of somebody's head sitting in the rocking chair. When the light landed on them, the chair stopped rocking. I ran up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, ran outside, slammed the back door shut, and locked my front and back door after getting back inside. I went to my room and stood at the window, watching the house. I then picked up the phone and called my dad. He seemed more surprised than concerned when I told him, confirming that nobody lives there. He calmly told me to get the police over there to check it out. When I hung up the phone, I looked out the window again. And right across from me, on the same level, there was somebody standing at the upstairs window of the abandoned house with the window open. I shut the blinds and called the police. They told me to keep watch through my window, and when I lifted the blinds back up, he was gone. I just hoped he was still in the house by the time the cops showed up. But of course, just my luck, the house was devoid of any people or furniture. Well, except for one thing. A single wooden rocking chair in the otherwise empty basement.